If you'd like to try what we make at Superstition, it's as easy as going to our website, superstitionmeadery.com, clicking on Web Store, and you're shopping. Make sure you follow us on social media because we release new products almost every week, and you might just find your next favorite craft beverage. Cheers. So commonly, mead is a sweeter drink. There's a couple of reasons for that, but the answer is absolutely not. Not all mead is sweet. That is determined by the mead maker. So when you add yeast to a must is unfermented wine, mead, or cider. The beer world calls that wort. So we take our must, and the must has to be at the ideal temperature for the yeast to work, and each strain of yeast that may be best suited for different types of red wine, white wine, mead, or cider, or beer. There's even wild yeast in the air all around us. You could just leave the must and it will ferment eventually. It may not taste the way you want, but it could. Depends on where you live around the world. Anyways, when you allow yeast to do its job, and if the potential sugar that yeast is converting into alcohol and flavor and esters and phenols and all of these compounds that we smell and taste and enjoy in the alcoholic beverages that we all love, that's going to determine the sweetness level, right? So if you were to take a 5-gallon carboy or bucket in home brewing and you had 1 pound of honey, that would be equal to, if it was in 5 gallons of water, 1% alcohol by volume if you ferment it dry. The word dry means not sweet. It's kind of a weird word, but dry means not sweet, sweet means sweet, and if you were to ferment 1 gallon or 12 pounds of honey in 4 gallons of water, you add it to it, so you have this total 5-gallon solution. You then have a 12% ABV or alcohol by volume mead. That's how we have to indicate on labels the alcohol content. So there's some alcohol by weight and some other ways to measure things, but we talk about ABVs, alcohol by volume. It's all the rules are made up. And so when you take that concept of that every pound of honey and every 5 gallons of honey and water equaling 1% ABV, that scales up like infinitely. You could have a 10,000 gallon batch, 1,000 gallon batch, doesn't matter. That is how much alcohol you can convert with yeast from the sugar. And if you allow the yeast to do its job, it's going to want to keep going until there's no more sugar to ferment. Yeast has several life cycles. It sort of begins where it's preparing itself at this microscopic level to do its job. And then ultimately the yeast knows it's building up some reserves, it's starting to assimilate some sugar. It's going to grow an acrospore. And an acrospore is this little bud of a yeast cell as the yeast is reproducing asexually. And if you don't know what that means, you got to go back to high school. I'm not going to talk about that right now. But yeast on its own can grow another yeast cell. And in the process of growing the acrospore to prepare to divide with mitosis, it's going to take all of the oxygen that's inside of that must and absorb it into the yeast cell to grow that acrospore. So one of the differences in fermenting a mead than fermenting most wines and beers is that we actually will add food-grade oxygen in that initial part of the fermentation to assist the yeast cell to grow those acrospores, to prepare to bud, to grow more yeast, to make more alcohol, to do its job. So yeast will have different yeast strains. They're all different types of yeast, just like there's different types of animals, different types of people, different types of cars. There's different types of yeast, and each yeast strain has a capacity to turn a certain amount of sugar into a certain amount of alcohol. And we call that the tolerance level. How much work can a certain yeast strain do on a certain amount of sugar? And you also have to realize as a mead maker that you can possibly put way too much sugar into the solution. That would be a hyperosmotic solution. The pressure that it would be exerted on those cells of the yeast would be too much for them to work. You would stress them out. Some of them would be working, but when yeast is stressed, it will create negative flavors and aromas, things that you don't want. So What you want to do as a mead maker is come up with a plan. You've got an idea that the end result will be a certain ABV, a certain sweetness level. You're going to select a yeast that can handle that job. You're going to support the job of that yeast at different phases in its life cycle, ultimately creating something that hopefully meets your goals. In the case of Lager Mas de Oro, this is one of my favorite meads, and it means tears of gold in Spanish. It looks golden, it's beautiful. It's made with Arizona mesquite honey. We actually ferment this dry or almost dry every single time we make this batch. And then we put it into a bourbon barrel for 3 to 12 months, depending on the barrels, depending on our stock of this product. And the longer it sits in the barrel, the more it's going to evolve and change and smooth out. This particular batch spent a year in barrels. And what I know happened from having dissected barrels is that when you make bourbon, legally to be a bourbon, you don't have to be in Kentucky, that's kind of like a myth, but you have to use a certain recipe and you have to age in a certain type of barrel, which is heavy charred, brand new American oak for a minimum of 2 years. And when you do that, you're introducing the bourbon to this, it looks like black alligator skin inside of a barrel. And you're gonna get the color of bourbon that starts out clear, by the way. It's gonna turn it light brown to maybe caramel, maybe dark brown, depending on how long it's in there. And you're gonna extract smoky flavors and rich caramel flavors. And when you get past that part of the wood to the toasted part that's beyond the charred part, that's when you're gonna get some of the flavors that you might get from wine, from barrel aging something like a big cab. And when you cook the lignin in wood, that fibrous component that makes wood, you can chemically change it to be identical to the flavor in vanilla beans or vanillin. And so this batch of LDO is dry. If you measure this, there's gonna be very little sugar in here. But to a wine drinker, to someone that doesn't drink sweet meads very often, they're gonna drink this and they're gonna tell you it's sweet. To a mead judge, they would say, oh no, that's a dry mead. Because they can differentiate on their palate what makes something sweet and what seems sweet. So I taste vanilla in here, and no one has ever tried vanilla unless you've licked a vanilla bean, because they can be bitter, and thought vanilla is dry, meaning not sweet. You're gonna get some flavor from this and some aroma that is evocative of things that are sweet, like honey. You can smell honey aromatics. Some of this is retained through the fermentation process. You're gonna smell and taste vanilla, and you associate in your brain that vanilla is in ice cream and desserts, and it's delicious, and it's sweet, and it affects the mouthfeel. None of those things affect the actual sugar that's in here, but this is a dry mead. Maybe it's an off-dry mead, batch to batch. It is not sweet, but when you drink it, when you smell it, when you swirl it around, it doesn't come off as being astringent, tannic, and dry like a big French Bordeaux. So mead is so complex and so interesting that even something that is on the dry side can present itself as being on the sweeter side. And it's really kind of cool if you know these things and you know these differences and you know how it's made and you understand this and you apply that to your experience of having a glass of something that is really special. And like, it's not just me saying it, silver medal, gold medal at the world's biggest mead competition. This is one of the best dry meads ever made, even though it kind of seems sweet. But then again, our range is so vast, we do things that are just unequivocally dry to any palate, all the way up to semi-sweet to sweet. And I think it's such a common question, is mead sweet? Because so many meads are. One of the reasons is that when something is sweet, it allows different flavors to express themselves in other ways. So if you took a blackberry mead and you fermented it bone dry, if you did everything the right way, probably if you served it a little chilled, it's gonna be really pleasant, really nice. But if you add just a little sweetness, all of a sudden, that blackberry flavor comes back to the surface and it makes it alive. And we as human beings and as animals are are trained to identify things that are sweet. We love things that are sweet. And there will be people like all the time, like, I don't like to drink sweet things. Well, do you like ice cream? Do you like pizza? Do you like dessert? You're just, honestly, you're in a very small box if you think that those things aren't delicious. Let's just be honest. And so we are trained to like sweet things. And throughout evolution, throughout thousands or millions of years, depending on what you ascribe to, we have selected as humans and as animal species things that are sweet. And that's why strawberries are sweet, because people kept eating the good ones and spreading the seeds out. And then just throughout time, through natural selection and people selecting things and animals selecting things that are sweet, we have sweet berries. We have sweet things in life that often define really what is the most flavorful, enjoyable thing you can have. So yes, mead can be sweet, and it often is, but it also can be dry and beautiful. And this is what I drink when I come in all the time. Cheers.